Some crimes are so unbelievable that even the most devoted true crime devotees would be horrified to look up the graphic details online. It's hard to understand how these sadistic killers carried out their murders when we consider the suffering that the victims must have endured. Which historical cases are the most challenging and disturbing? We are going to enlist some of them today. Number 10. The Cheshire Family Murders. The Petit family was murdered in their Connecticut home in 2007 after Jennifer Hawk Petit and her 2 teenage daughters were attacked. Despite being hurt, the father, Dr. William Petit, was able to flee before the assailants set fire to the house. Jennifer and her 17-year-old daughter, Haley, were at a grocery store when Joshua and Stephen, 2 released criminals, set their sights on the family. They trailed them home, tortured them mercilessly, and then killed them. Jennifer died by strangulation, and Haley and her 11-year-old sister Michelle died from smoke inhalation while they were strapped to their beds. The crime's details are so horrible that it was discovered that the police knew the family was being held captive, but had taken too long to secure the street instead of going inside to assist them. The murderers received a death sentence, which was converted to life in prison when Connecticut outlawed the death penalty in 2012. Number 9. The murder of Sylvia Likens. More than 50 years after Sylvia Likens' brutal and cruel murder, Indiana is still troubled. Police discovered 16-year-old Likens' body in 1965, lying on a dirty mattress. More than 150 burns and cuts covered her. The little girl was reduced to little more than skin and bone, and it was immediately evident that she had starved to death. She died, and it was discovered later from dehydration and a brain hemorrhage. Gertrude, a mother of 7, was taken into custody and accused of first-degree murder. The parents of Likens had given Gertrude $20 a week to look after her and their other daughter, Jenny. Rather, Gertrude let her own kids beat Likens and make her eat waste. That was just a group of wild kids. But here, an adult was keeping an eye on them while they worked. It wasn't kids acting out. Number 8. Richard Speck Slaughter. Chicago was forever altered when Richard Speck entered South Chicago Community Hospital and proceeded to murder and torture 8 nurses in a methodical manner. During the early hours of July 14, 1966, Speck led the nurses like lambs to the slaughter during an attack that lasted 5 hours. After the massacre was over, Speck was too preoccupied with his own killing rampage to notice that one of his hostages had taken up residence beneath a bunk bed. After that, she jumped out of a window and fled for her life. Born to Raise Hell was the tattoo that the victim remembered most about Speck. After attempting suicide 2 days prior, the cold-blooded murderer showed up at County Cook Hospital, where a medical professional identified the tattoo from media accounts. Regarding the sadistic attacks, the Assistant Cook County District Attorney stated that they were the first instance of random mass murder in the 20th century. In actuality, an era of innocence was coming to an end. Everything was altered by it. We all started to notice our security much more. A stranger could slaughter 8 nurses in their beds without cause or justification. Number 7. Cannibal Armin Meiwes. On the cannibalism fetish website, The Cannibal Cafe, German Armin Meiwes placed an advertisement in 2001 seeking a well-built 18 to 30 years old to be killed and eaten. With the exception of Bernd George and Brandy, a lot of people who responded to the advertisement were turned down. During his early years, Meiwes dreamed that he would never experience loneliness again if he were to consume someone. To put it simply, Meiwes' videotape of himself dismembering Brandy is sickening. They both tried to eat after Meiwes severed the victim's pus, but it was too chewy. After trying to kill himself with 20 sleeping pills, Brandy eventually bled out from the amputation. Meiwes killed Brandy by slitting his throat and then spent 10 months eating the bones. After telling a psychiatrist that his thoughts of consuming people had not gone away, he was given a life sentence. Number 6. Kermit Gosnell's abortions. Kermit Gosnell operated filthy, dangerous clinics at the Women's Medical Society, where he performed late-term abortions. There had been complaints against his practice dating back decades, and he had owned the medical center since 1979. Gosnell was detained in 2011 on suspicion of killing 7 infants, who had initially escaped his abortion attempts, but later succumbed to his evil. A grand jury was informed that Gosnell was not a gynecologist because he did not meet the requirements, but he was still billing up to $3,000 for each late-term abortion. In their depositions, his employees described in great detail how they saw babies move or cry following the termination. The specifics of how he then took their lives are extremely upsetting. Gosnell was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, 21 counts of illegal late-term abortion, and 211 counts of breaking the law requiring 24-hour informed consent. He received a life sentence without the chance of release. Number 5. Joseph Mengel's experiment. During World War II, Dr. Joseph Mengele gained fame for his strange medical experiments, most of which involved the horrifying treatment of twins. Mengele chose children at Auschwitz in 1943 for his lethal experiments. Renate Gutmann survived Mengele and was a twin. She remembers in a chilling story, "I was taken to a hospital where I was measured, x-rayed, and had blood drawn from my neck. I was separated from my brother and mother. I was once cut with a knife while strapped to a table. After receiving injections, I experienced diarrhea and vomiting. Guards arrived to take the sick to be executed while they were sick in the hospital following an injection." Although the exact number of victims is unknown, witnesses stated that Mengele used chloroform injections in the hearts of up to 14 twins in a single night. He fled to South America after the war to avoid being prosecuted, where he passed away in 1979 at the age of 67 from a stroke. Number 4. Toy Box Killer's Torture Room. David Ray Parker gained notoriety as the Toy Box Killer in 1999 after the horrifying discovery of his cruel torture chamber. He is thought to have abducted, tortured, and killed up to 60 people in New Mexico. Since many of the bodies were dismembered and disposed of in secret, they were never found again. After 3 days of unspeakable torture, his last intended victim fortunately survived. When police arrived at the crime scene, they found a soundproof truck trailer filled with surgical instruments and a gynecology table that was strapped down, among other tools used to torture victims. Additionally, Parker recorded his victim being tortured. He claimed, without expressing regret for his actions, that making these tapes was a source of entertainment for me. Parker's victims never received justice because, in 2002, he suffered a heart attack prior to starting his 223-year prison sentence. Number 3. Albert Fish's Letter. Albert Fish was a serial killer in the state of New York who preyed on young children. The murderer and sadistic child tormentor boasted that he had children in every state. He was put to death in 1936 for the killings of Grace Budd, age 10, Frances McDonnell, age 9, and Billy Gaffney, age 4. Fish further compounded Grace Budd's suffering by sending her a twisted letter. "I grabbed her after he wrote to her, and she promised to tell her mother. First, I undressed her. After strangling her to death, I chopped her up into tiny pieces so I could carry my meat to my rooms, cook it, and consume it. Her little as was roasted in the oven, how sweet and tender. I finished eating her entire body in 9 days. Among the most terrible serial killers in history, he is remembered." Number 2. The Hi-Fi Murders. The 1974 Hi-Fi murders remain shocking to this day. Shortly before closing, 3 men, namely Keith Roberts, William Andrews, and Dale Selby, entered the Hi-Fi shop in Ogden. Then, before robbing the store, they held store employees Stanley Walker, aged 20, and Michelle Ansley, aged 18, captive in the basement. Later, while doing tasks, 16-year-old Byron entered the store and was also taken hostage. When Orrin Walker, Stanley's father and Brian's mother, arrived at the store to look for their kids, they both met the same end. The hostages were made to drink an acidic beverage that caused their lips, tongues, and throats to burn and their skin to peel off, leading to the unspeakable events that followed. 3 of the hostages were shot to death during the hours of torture, which also involved the use of a ballpoint pen as a weapon. Byron and Orrin, the 2 survivors, both suffered irreversible injuries that altered their lives, with the exception of Keith Roberts, who was found guilty of violent robbery and given a life sentence. All of the crazy killers were put to death by lethal injection. Number 1. The Toolbox Killer's Recording. Lawrence Bidaker and Roy Norris, a dreadful serial killer team, murdered 5 girls with the most horrifying techniques imaginable. The victims, who ranged in age from 13 to 18, were taken during a 5-month period in 1979 while traveling on Southern Californian highways. The murderers used pliers, an ice pick, a screwdriver, and vise grips to subject them to the worst physical agony possible. They also got video footage of their victims' screams. A retired Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney, who was one of the killers, claimed, years after the trial, that he was still troubled by the evidence, and that he would hear the girls screaming and want to run to them. Binnicker said from behind bars, "I just happened to get lucky and got one of the most literal judges. They don't appear to be in a rush. Since I have nothing coming up, I'm not either." The trial was not exactly fair, however. I can't complain because I deserve to be here. Therefore, they were a few of the most horrifying and brutal offenders on our list. Subscribe to our channel to see more interesting videos.